We have a story we tell about artists. The story goes like this. The greatest art comes from the deepest pain, that to make something truly alive, you must first be half destroyed. That suffering is not a side effect of the creative life. It is the fuel. That the sad artist is not an unfortunate archetype, but a necessary one. That if you want to make real work, you have to bleed for it. It is one of the most seductive ideas in all of culture. It is also one of the most dangerous. And I want to talk about what it actually costs. Not just to believe it, but to build a life around it. First, let's be honest about where this idea comes from. We have spent centuries selecting from the full population of artists, whoever lived, the ones whose suffering was most legible, most dramatic, most useful to the story we want to tell about what art requires. Van Gogh, Sylvia Plath, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Virginia Woolf, Mark Rothko, Edvard Munch. These are real people who made real work and lived real, often devastating lives. Their suffering was not invented. Their pain was not a performance. And the connection between their inner lives and their art is genuine and worth taking seriously. But here is what we never say in the same breath. Van Gogh produced his most extraordinary work, the Starry Night, the Irises, the Arles paintings, during periods of relative stability between episodes in the hours when the illness had quieted enough for him to work. He painted ferociously. He was disciplined. He wrote thousands of letters full of rigorous, lucid thinking about art and color and technique. The madness did not make the paintings. The paintings happened in spite of the madness, and often because he had found just enough stillness to hold a brush. We have edited that part out. We kept the ear. This is what psychologists call survivorship bias, and it runs so deep in our cultural understanding of creativity that most of us have never once questioned it. We see the artists who suffered and made great work, and we draw a line between the suffering and the greatness. What we don't see, what is invisible by definition, are all the artists who suffered and made nothing, who were so hollowed out by depression, addiction, grief, or instability that the work never came, who had everything it takes to make something extraordinary, except the one thing suffering kept taking from them, the capacity to function. For every Plath, there are hundreds of writers whose depression silenced them entirely, whose manuscripts were never finished, whose voices we will never hear because the illness won before the work could. We don't tell their stories, they don't fit the myth. And so the myth survives, selection bias intact, pointing at its beautiful evidence and saying, see, suffering and greatness, as if the suffering was the cause, and not, very often, the thing that nearly prevented the greatness from existing at all. Here's what the research actually says. K. Redfield Jamison, the psychiatrist who wrote the definitive study on creativity and mental illness, found that artists do have higher rates of certain mood disorders than the general population. That part of the myth has some truth to it. But what her research also found, and what almost never makes it into the cultural conversation, is that the creative work did not happen during the episodes of illness. It happened in between them, during the periods of stability, during the windows when the person was well enough to sit down and do the sustained, disciplined, technically demanding work that making art actually requires. Mania, she found, could sometimes generate the raw material, the images, the energy, the appetite, but the work itself, the shaping and the crafting and the revision, required a mind that was present, coherent, capable of judgment. In other words, the suffering was not the engine. The survival of the suffering was. So why does the myth persist? Partly because it makes a better story. Tragedy is more dramatic than persistence. A life cut short is more poetic, culturally, than a life that kept going. We have a long and troubling history of aestheticizing the destruction of artists, of finding their breakdowns beautiful, their deaths romantic, their self-destruction somehow proof of the depth of their feeling. But partly, and this is the part I want you to sit with, the myth persists because it is useful to people who are not artists. A suffering artist is legible, understandable, safely other. The suffering artist is the proof that great creative gifts come at a price that most people are not willing to pay, which conveniently explains why most people don't pay it. The myth lets everyone off the hook. It turns artistic achievement into a matter of temperament, of fate, of tragic predisposition, rather than what it mostly is, which is work. Ordinary, unglamorous, repetitive, daily work. If great art requires suffering, then people who don't make great art didn't suffer enough, and people who do make great art must have suffered accordingly. The myth is circular and self-sealing, and it keeps everyone in their assigned position. But here is what I think is the most quietly destructive thing about this story. It is what it does to the artists who believe it, because artists do believe it at disproportionate rates. They absorb it from the culture the way they absorb everything, deeply, personally, until it stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like a truth about themselves. And once you believe that suffering is the source of your work, you develop a very complicated relationship with your own well-being. You start to distrust stability. You start to fear happiness, not because you don't want to be happy. Of course you do. But because some part of you has come to believe that contentment is the enemy of depth, that if you get too comfortable, too well, too at peace, the work will stop meaning anything, that the rawness you need to make real art lives on the other side of pain, and the only way to stay in contact with it is to stay in some way in pain. This is not a small thing. This is a life organized around its own suffering. A creative practice that requires for its continuation that you remain damaged. And the terrible irony is that this belief, the belief that you need your pain, is itself one of the things that keeps people most profoundly stuck. Not productive, not generative, not making the work, just suffering, and waiting for the suffering to alchemize into something, and wondering why it hasn't yet. Let me tell you what actually feeds great creative work. Not suffering, depth. These are not the same thing. Suffering can produce depth. It can crack you open, reorder your priorities, show you what actually matters underneath all the noise of ordinary life. In that sense, it can be a teacher, but it is a brutal and inefficient teacher, and it is not the only one. Depth also comes from attention, from the willingness to sit with things longer than is comfortable, from genuine curiosity about the world and the people in it, from a committed inner life, one that asks hard questions and tolerates uncertain answers, from reading and looking and listening, from loss, yes, but also from love, from failure, yes, but also from the slow, quiet accumulation of days that were not dramatic at all. Toni Morrison did not write from suffering. She wrote from a ferocious, capacious, almost architectural understanding of human experience, one she had built over decades of living and thinking and paying attention. She raised children. She held down a job. She slept. She was, by most accounts, a person who had built a life. And from inside that life, she made some of the most devastating and beautiful prose in the English language. The work was not less because she was not destroyed. The work was what it was because she was whole enough to make it. What would it mean to let go of this story? Not to pretend that artists don't suffer. They do. Life is hard, and the creative life has its own particular hardnesses. The rejection, the invisibility, the gap between the work you imagine and the work you can make, the years of effort that no one sees. All of that is real. But to stop requiring the suffering, to stop treating your pain as a creative credential, to stop using it as evidence that you are serious, that you are deep, that you are the real thing. Because the truth is that the most radical thing an artist can do right now, in a culture that is still, after all this time handing out dark halos to its most damaged creators, is to insist on being well, to build a life that can sustain the work, to treat your own stability not as a betrayal of your seriousness, but as its foundation. You are not more of an artist when you are suffering. You are less able to make the work. The goal was never the suffering. The goal was always what the suffering in its most generous moments made possible. Contact with something true. Honesty about what it means to be alive. You can have that without the wound. You are allowed to be okay. And the work you make from that place, from a life that is held together rather than falling apart, is not shallower than the work the myth promises. It is more sustained, more rigorous, more fully realized. It is the work of someone who had enough to eat and enough sleep and enough days without crisis to actually finish the thing. Finish the thing. That's it. That's the whole secret the myth was hiding. Not suffering, finishing.